Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us through Zoom and Facebook Live. And I'm here at the Burlington Police Department. I'm going to start this with a few opening remarks, and um, Chief John Murad will then provide some additional detail. We also have Commissioner Randall Harp, who is here with us in the police department. Will share some remarks as well. I will say after we talk about the use of force, which is the main reason for this event and having it here in Burlington, I do want to give the public an update on what I know about this outbreak in Winooski and what we're doing to contain it there and limit the spread to Burlington. And then we'll take questions on both these matters. So here we go. So the killing of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officers has again exposed that our country, in too many ways, continues to be defined by systemic racism. It also has exposed and brought attention once again to the many real problems that exist in American policing. In Burlington, for years, we have been working to chart a different path to build a police department that reflects the values of our community and embraces the forward-thinking practices and policies of 21st century policing. That said, we know this work is far from complete here in Burlington, and we know that we have made mistakes, and we also know that we have a role in doing everything we can here to encourage the rest of the country to do better and to do better ourselves. One area that we have been focused on for some time is improving our formal use of force policy. There's been for approximately a year an acknowledgement that the current policy has lagged behind our training and our actual practices. And last summer, we began with the City Council a process that spanned months to engage the public. And from last August to February, there was a special committee that was set up. I urged the creation, supported the work of the special committee, and that committee worked from August until February to review policing policies and to develop a new use of force policy that is more consistent with the values of the Burlington community and will be, I believe, a clearer policy for our officers to follow. That policy was part of the report that came back from the special committee to review policing policies to the City Council on February 18th of this year. And that night at the City Council, the council referred that report to committee. And I think had the pandemic not intervened over the course of the next month, we would probably have that new policy in place now. It was certainly interrupted. The progress on that was interrupted by the pandemic. Today, what we're doing here right now is to announce that we, the administration, Ms. Mayor, as well as the leadership of the police department, feel considerable urgency to put this new policy in place. And we are committed to working with the police commission for them to convene an emergency meeting next week to review and adopt this new use of force policy as quickly as possible. We're also releasing the new use of force policy today. It is very consistent with what came back from the committee in February. There are some refinements to it, and so this is an update from what came in February. And my understanding is that the commission will have an emergency meeting on Tuesday to review and hopefully adopt this policy. Subsequent to next Tuesday, the commission may decide that it wants to go farther than that, that it may want to continue working on the policy and consider additions or refinements. And the City Council may choose that as well. My hope is that this new policy is put in place next Tuesday or certainly next week, and that we take this as an iterative process. If there are future further refinements that are desired, that are going to take longer, that can happen. But my hope is we have this new policy in place right away. This new policy contains many key elements, including clear requirements for de-escalation, a duty to intervene, verbal warnings, reporting of all uses of force, and more. This new use of force policy comports with all 8 of the police use of force project's 8 can't wait recommendations. And today I'm also announcing that I have signed on to the mayor's pledge that President Obama urged all mayors to support in the middle of this week. And that too is an additional responding to that call and responding to national events, in addition to having this clearly better policy ready to adopt, all has contributed to the urgency of this announcement. Again, we know there's more work that will remain beyond this, and other work is happening. And like the plan I announced earlier this week, another example of the work that is ongoing is the 8-point plan to protect BIPOC communities and to ensure a racially just recovery from coronavirus that we announced this week and released some details on earlier this week. And there's considerably more as well. But this is an important step, and I welcome Chief Murad to share some additional thoughts and detail about this step.
All set? All right, thank you. The purpose of police is to keep people safe by preventing and responding to crime and disorder with and for our neighbors. And in the course of those kinds of duties, they are lawfully allowed to use force when objectively reasonable and necessary. And what we strive to do is to make certain that those uses are as infrequent as possible, that they are always lawful and proper, but that we can avoid them whenever possible. The use of force policy that we are currently looking at, that we are really ready to go on, is something that has been in the works even before the special committee, but has been refined by that committee, which was a multi-stakeholder process participated in by numerous members of our community. We met from August through February. We developed a really comprehensive review of how policing works and policy, and talked about what we wanted a strong policing use of force policy to contain. And the primary ideas for a good, strong use of force policy, one that not only comports with the 8 can't wait, but really is a national leader, is to ensure that it says that the duty of police is to protect human life, to keep people safe, that force must be objectively reasonable, proportional, and used to accomplish law enforcement objectives, that force must be consistent with law and policy and training, that de-escalation is prioritized. And with that, our current use of force policy that is currently in effect has one mention of de-escalation. The new use of force policy has 18. The ways in which we talk about these objectives that I'm outlining are important. When we can give more emphasis to the things that matter to us, it really does affect the way in which officers work in the field and the way in which we serve and work with our neighbors. Excessive force is prohibited in any modern use of force policy. The use of force has to be acknowledged that at times it is unavoidable. Officers have a duty to care for subjects in their custody. They have a duty to report all uses of force. They have a duty to intervene if they witness improper uses of force. There has to be ethical leadership and oversight. There has to be use of force investigations, and officers have to be able to justify every time they do use force. And force sometimes does require discipline, and that should be conducted in keeping with procedural justice and the rules that govern human resources for a city and contracts for unions. All of these things are components of a modern and updated use of force policy, and they are all in the policy that was created along with the committee to review policing policies. They are all in the document that we hope to be able to adopt. And while we immediately adopted under Chief Morrison's pen a duty to intervene and made certain that that was enacted as an order rather than as a directive, we determined that the best way to move forward for the overall use of force directive, its policy, was to make certain that we do it in keeping with the process that we use, which is to present it to the police commission and ensure that the police commission, made up of representatives of the people of Burlington, look at that policy, review that policy, and ultimately change it if they need to, amend it if necessary, and adopt it when it's ready. We're hopeful that that's soon, because I believe that the policy that we created together from August through February, that we presented to the city council in mid-February, is ready to go. It has been changed owing to tweaks from that committee to review policing practices as presented by the chairman of that committee, Randall Harp, to the city council. It has been since looked at to make sure that we're trying to get as many typos, et cetera, that we can get out. But it is a policy that's ready to go and ready to make certain that we are at the forefront of use of force, as we are with so many other areas, with de-escalation through our use of PERF ICAT, with handling people who are in emotional distress, with the use of tools like our emergency response vehicle, and in certain cases where we are really trying to work with other partners such as social services, street outreach, any number of others, ensuring that we are giving people as many resources as we can. The good news for us is that our use of force constitutes 2/3 of 1% of the incidents we record every year. 2/3 of 1% of incidents involve any use of force, which is any bit of force that goes beyond compliant handcuffing. That could be a grab on an arm. It could be pointing a firearm. It could be something more. But 2/3 of 1% includes all that range. And so while those are a small fraction of what we do, they are nevertheless among the highest stakes and most important interactions we have with people, and we have to get them right. A policy that is strong, updated, and modern is the first step to that. So there is a document, I believe, that was made available to the press that talks about the ways in which specifically we are in comportment with the 8 can't wait. Again, it has to do with de-escalation. It has to do with a strong policy on chokeholds and the avoidance of those. And for us, it is only permissible when lethal force would otherwise be permissible. It is failing to require, it's requiring that officers intervene and stop excessive force. It is prohibiting excessive force. It is restricting officers from moving and shooting at moving vehicles. It is the creation of a strong use of force continuum that talks about the levels of force and the actions of a subject that would require each level. It is a requirement that officers exhaust all other reasonable means before resorting to lethal force. It is requiring officers to give a verbal warning prior to a use of force. In the 8 can't wait, it is specifically prior to a lethal use of force. Our policy requests that officers give a verbal warning prior to using any force when it is feasible and when it is possible, given the circumstances and safety of all concerned. And that's part of the 8 can't wait requirement as well. And finally, it's requiring officers to report all uses of force. That is something that we currently do. Our officers are required to report any time they use force. And those uses of force are reviewed by experts in the department. And when necessary, they are forwarded up to executives and, if necessary, to local prosecutors. So many of these things are things that were in place but needed to be emphasized more to assure our neighbors that these are the things that matter to us and that we take them very, very seriously, which we do. Overall, I want to say that this is a responsibility that officers are incredibly cognizant of. It is one of the most important powers that they wield, and the one that, as those numbers show, they wield at as little as possible. The idea of making certain that we are articulating how we use it, why we use it, and circumscribing it as best as we can is an incredibly important idea for this department and for this city. Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Murad. Thank you, Mayor Weinberger. I just want to say a little bit about the policy from the standpoint of the chair of the Reform Committee that met, and also as a member of the Police Commission. I think that it is a good policy. It does, as was mentioned already, it does conform with the, and in some ways go beyond the 8 can't wait requirements that are set out. It also does conform with the principles that the Reform Committee put forward and suggested. And so I look forward as a member of the Police Commission to getting that policy. The most recent draft that I saw was good. And so I look forward to being able to evaluate that and to adopt it as soon as possible. Of course, a policy by itself is not enough. Right? A policy can tell an officer that it's prohibited to leave your knee on someone's neck for 8 minutes or 2.5 minutes after someone is unconscious. But the policy itself cannot impose any discipline after that has happened. And the policy itself cannot get an officer to view the person who is under their custody as somebody who is worthy of respect, so someone whose life matters. And so the important thing to do, in addition to adopting the best policies that we can, is ensure also that all officers do see that the people that they interact with, that their lives do matter, and also that there are principles in place to ensure that those policies are conformed to. You know, the officer in Minneapolis, Officer Chauvin, was a training officer, and several of the officers on scene were very new to the department, and in fact were being trained by Officer Chauvin. And so the idea is you don't want to have principles that maybe conform with department policy, but which are unacceptable to have as attitudes from members of law enforcement towards the community. You don't want those principles to be replicated through a department. And policy itself cannot do that. When we receive complaints at the Police Commission, very often the complaints don't allege a particular violation of a policy. Very often the complaints speak more to a general concern that the officer did not respect them as a person. The officer did not respect their humanity. And the idea is, you want to find a way to ensure, and I think that there's very good progress in that in this department right now. You want to find a way to ensure that every officer, that everybody who comes in contact with an officer feels as though that officer is treating them as they would their own brother and sister, or as they would to someone else on the police force, or as they would to their first grade teacher, or as they would to their next door neighbor. Policy by itself cannot ensure that every officer views everyone they come into contact with as their neighbor. And so we're going to try to continue work on the Police Commission and in conjunction with the chiefs and with the mayor and with City Council to find ways to ensure that the members of the Burlington Police Department continue to have that attitude towards people that they interact with. So the policy is important and it's good, and I look forward to adopting it. But of course, there's more work to be done, and we look forward to doing that.
Thank you, Commissioner Hart, for those words. Thank you, Chief Murad, for walking everyone through that. I appreciate the remarks from Commissioner Hart and agree on both counts. I think policy does matter. I was struck in the wake of the incident in Minneapolis, how significant it was that the duty to intervene was part of the policy in Minneapolis, and that is what allowed the chief and to take swift action to make it to dismiss officers who did not act on that duty to intervene. And I believe the duty to intervene is also playing a role in the criminal charges now that the three officers, not Mr. Officer Chauvin, but the other 3 officers are facing. I think the underlying policy has had an impact on that. That was contributed to my feeling and my request to Chiefs Murad and Morrison that we act quickly to make sure it was explicitly clear, as they did on Monday, to put in place the by order this duty to intervene. I think it is even better to have it actually formally part of this use of force policy, so that there is no ambiguity, no lack of clarity about what is expected of our officers. And it is my hope that having a clear, more accessible policy will also um, be important for the public to understand how the this department is operating and what our goals and our intent is with our policies. So thank you for everyone who worked so hard. And again, this was many months of work. Thank you. And it's not just the two people in the room that were on that committee. It was 13 others who served on that committee. Thank you to everyone who was on that committee. Thank you to the many members of the public who came out and testified in front of that committee. And thank you to the commission for agreeing to act urgently on this new policy. And I know that that sentiment is also shared. I've been in touch with President Tracy and Councilor Perry Freeman, who is the chair of the City Council's Public Safety Committee. I know they share a desire to make this improvement soon as well. I'm going to, I guess I have one more thing to say, and I just think it's worth saying. This is National Gun Violence Awareness Day, and the beginning of Wear Orange Weekend. And I think as we're talking about police policy, as we're talking about how we reduce levels of violence against Black Americans and against Americans in general, I think it's worth noting that one of the fundamental driving causes of these problems, contributors to these problems, is certainly racism is at the heart of the problem we're talking about today. Additionally, the prevalence of guns in the society, the free, the huge numbers of guns that are circulating in America make all these issues even more challenging as well. And I think it's worth noting that, and I'm happy to be a part of Wear Orange Weekend. I'm now going to shift gears, and I want to update, share with Burlingtonians what I know about this outbreak in Winooski that of coronavirus. We have, I want people to know the city of Burlington has been monitoring this outbreak from the beginning. We have been in touch with the Department of Health throughout this, and we were part of a briefing this morning where it became clear that in addition to the reported positives in Winooski that has been in the news over the last week, there's now, as of today, a confirmed, related to this outbreak, a confirmed positive case in the Old North End of Burlington. One thing we have learned in this outbreak is that fast, decisive action matters. And so we have been working with the state throughout the day and have received confirmation that the state has the capacity and is going to move quickly to contain this virus. And using the tools that we have, they will be setting up a mobile testing clinic at St. Joseph's in the parking lot by the St. Joseph's Community Center. The Old North End Community Center, and that site will be open on both Saturday and Sunday. We're looking to the Department of Health to release details about the hours, about how people are going to access that site. This has all been moving pretty quickly over the course of the day, and we expect they're going to make an update with those details shortly. I want to be clear, this is in addition to, not substitute, this is in addition to the ongoing National Guard effort up at the Waterman parking lot that is part of the Box-It-In strategy regarding June 1 and the return of students to Burlington from out of state who are expected to go into quarantine and testing. That is going to continue. That's not going to be impacted by this. This is a separate facility being run by the Department of Health and not the National Guard, and these are separate matters. And I really want to kind of acknowledge and appreciate how far we've come since mid-March when this began. We would not have, there's just nowhere near the capacity to run these kind of simultaneous operations here in Burlington, in addition to another major operation in Winooski and all the other operations that are going on around the state. Hope the public sees this as an indication that the capacity to contain and suppress and try to track this virus is greatly expanded. I don't think this news should be a reason to panic or to be overly alarmed for Burlingtonians. At the same time, I think we should acknowledge, I've been very vocal that since mid-April, we have been doing very well here in Chittenden County. The amount of virus in the community has been very low, and it has been there's been very little of it circulating, and that's what's allowed us to take these careful steps towards reopening. I would encourage Burlingtonians to just be aware that this news about this outbreak, uh, in addition to the general loosening that is going on, and in addition to um, the people coming back to Vermont from out of state, I think it's fair for people to be just mindful of that and mindful that there is a modestly elevated risk over where we were a week ago. And that's the way this virus, I think this is going to go for some time. We're going to just have to stay aware of what's going on. The city is developing tools to help people stay aware. And again, I don't think this should be overly a cause for concern, but I think as we are all managing risk in this pandemic, trying to figure out what to do and what not to do, um, I think I thought it was important to share with Burlingtonians everything that we know about the current situation here. With that, I think that concludes the prepared remarks here, and we'd be happy to take questions from the media if there are any, Olivia.
Yes, we do have a few. Our first question is from Courtney Lambden at 7 Days. Courtney's question is, are any of the special committee's recommendations not included in the new use of force policy? And if so, which ones and why?
I'm going to let these two gentlemen who to speak to this in a moment, but I do want to be clear. The special committee's recommendations went beyond simply the use of force policy. There were other recommendations that are, I would say, the top of the to-do list of the additional work that all three of us have referenced that needs to happen beyond the update of policy. So certainly this is in no way dealing with all of the work that the special committee recommended. As far as whether there's, maybe Chief Murad, you're best able to speak to, I mean, whether there's any deviation from the recommendations on the policy.
No, there is not. The recommendations made by the committee to review policing policies, insofar as they relate to a use of force policy, have all been incorporated into the document that is developed and is ready to be reviewed. And I'm very hopeful that, given that two members of the committee to review policing policies are also members of the police commission, that they will be able to look as police commissioners now at this policy, determine the degree to which it comports with the objectives of the committee, and make certain that we really do have a document that was created by our community for our community to make certain that we're keeping our neighbors as safe as possible.
Hopefully that addresses that, Olivia. Are there further questions?
Next question is from Aiden Quigley at VT Digger. And Aiden has two questions. Aiden is on the Zoom. So Aiden, you should be able to enable your microphone now.
Yep, I am here. My main question is, can someone explain the main differences between the old and new policies?
As I said, a lot of it has to do with emphasis. When you go from a document that mentions de-escalation once to a document that mentions it 18 times, you are explaining for your audience what it is that is important to you. And that is important. Avoiding the use of force is important. It's important to every man and woman in this police department, and they do it every single day. So when we talk about 2/3 of 1% of incidents, we're talking about a lot of instances in which force was completely avoided. That is an important distinction. The others are many of the things that I mentioned, and I don't have the sheet in front of me, but being very clear and explicit about the duty to protect life, the duty of care of subjects, the duty to intervene, the presence of a specific prohibition against excessive force and a specific duty to intervene. Those are new to this policy, although, as I pointed out, Chief Morrison correctly introduced those as orders earlier this week in order to make certain that we were clear on those. However, I will say that because excessive force is by its definition not objectively reasonable, it was already prohibited in the current existing policy. It is a matter of making certain that we are clear about these things, that we define these things, that we share with our officers and with our neighbors what it is that we want that really distinguishes this new use of force policy from the old one.
Another question is on the 8 can't wait steps. How many of those are now in the new policy that were not in the old policy, and which ones?
All of them are in the new policy, and you know, again, I think in some sense you can interpret much of the existing policies and orders to have been there in the past, but this makes them much more clear. Do you want to add anything to that?
I don't have a lot to add to that, Mr. Mayor. You're right. It is a matter of saying that those policies were present in the interpretation of that policy, but they're much more clearly stated now. However, I will say that the duty to intervene was not explicitly stated in the current policy, and that is among the rules that are requested by the 8 can't wait. It's in there. Insofar as which parts of 8 can't wait are in the new policy, all of them. They are all in there. And frankly, I believe that it goes farther, that it is very close to the model policy provided by Campaign Zero, that it is in many ways stronger than that, because Campaign Zero asks members who are looking at their model policy to look at model policies from other agencies, Seattle, others as well. And we went farther than that. We reviewed a lot of other agencies in the course of the committee to review policing policies. Camden, Seattle, Austin. And these policies gave us guidance as to what we needed for ours and what we needed to make certain that we were serving and adjusting it for this community and the expectations of this community.
Olivia, are there further questions?
Aiden, I think you had one more that you emailed to me. I don't know if you want to jump in with that one.
Yeah, sure. Which date did Deputy Chief Murad become acting chief? Murad.
He is not the acting chief at this point. Chief Morrison is still the interim chief. She can't be here today. Simply, she's experiencing a cold and couldn't join us. But she's been very involved in the steps leading up to this release, and she continues to be in charge of the department. She, I believe a week from today, will be her last day before this hiatus. At that point, I believe it is the 12th is the plan that Chief Murad will become then the acting chief.
And it looks like those are the questions that we have from members of the media.
Hold on just one second. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we are planning a briefing again on Monday. We have a number of other updates. So we'll go back to our the rhythm we've been in of these Monday, Wednesday, Friday briefings. That's our plan for next week. Hope everyone has a good weekend, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.